How home ownership obsession can damage the economy. A man's castle is his home, as the expression goes. No single characteristic is more indicative of an American citizen's financial security than his place of residence. It goes beyond the American dream alone. It has been suggested to people all over the wealthy world that they should own their own homes. The moment to purchase a home is now. Start climbing the housing ladder starting at less than $60,000. People can climb the housing ladder with the aid of Help to Buy. A part of that dream is having a home. However, why is there such a push to climb the property ladder? People don't really contest the notion that owning a property is advantageous. They've always been taught it, so they assume it must be true. The fixation with home ownership has unforeseen repercussions that have collapsed the banking system and warped the housing market. The fulfillment of the American dream, which is admired by everyone in the globe. Here's Tim. He rents in London. This is Deanna. She rents in Zurich. Tim, a 30-year-old salesman, is eager to climb the property ladder. Not being able to possess something you can call your own is tremendously frustrating. Deanna, though, is not rushing. She has been renting for a whole 20 years since she came to Switzerland. With her twin sons and her partner, Deanna leases this apartment. She is employed by a university as a lecturer. They've been here for 3 years and says that it feels like home for them. The people who live in Switzerland have one of the most competitive economies in the world and a very good standard of living. You could assume that means that the majority of individuals own their own home. Not at all. Switzerland has the lowest home ownership rate in the OECD, a collection of primarily wealthy nations, at 38%. It is substantially higher in Britain. Ownership of homes is held by the occupants in 2/3 of cases. The housing market in Switzerland is noticeably more stable than the one in Britain, according to The Economist's Index of Home Prices. The value of a home in Switzerland has only increased by 70% since 1970. In the same time frame, prices in Britain rose by 346%. Evidence exists to support the relationship between ownership rates and market volatility. We must go back 100 years to comprehend the reason. In Britain, America, and other affluent nations at the start of the 20th century, the majority of people were renters. Just 1 in 4 households owned their own property in Britain, for instance. However, many countries all across the wealthy world made a significant shift in policy following the Second World War. They made the decision to establish home-owning countries. The concept was that if you own a home, you may sell it when you retire and possibly live off the income. Or at least you have some assets you can sell if you lose your job. To encourage home ownership, programs like low-interest loans, mortgage tax benefits, and capital gains tax relief have been implemented. All of these factors together amount to a sizable government subsidy for home ownership. Home ownership soared starting in the 1950s. The sum of money given by banks and mortgages also changed. Mortgage lending accounted by 63% of the GDP of wealthy countries in 2008. However, over time, this new world of homeowners brought about more issues than it resolved. Financial calamity was brought on. It appears that no one can cease the bleeding. 10 years ago, there was a housing crisis that was a huge, widespread global financial disaster. It was obvious there was a problem since homeowners were defaulting on their mortgages at historic rates. Many Americans believed they were making sound financial decisions when they bought homes, but that assumption turned out to be entirely false. The surge in home ownership has a devastating side effect: the crash. However, encouraging people to own their own homes has negative effects that go much further than only economic downturns. The primary issue has to do with supply. Today, the entire wealthy world constructs about half as many homes per person as it did in the 1960s. In the areas of the country where you most like to see an increase in construction, the decline has been quite concentrated. So in those vibrant, wealthy, productive, and cool cities. I've been researching housing prices ever since my arrival in London. I believe that having something to call your own and owning it comes naturally to everyone. However, when people do purchase their own homes, they are more inclined to object to local development. The effects of this mindset have been thoroughly studied by Christian Hilber. Homeowners in a country with a high home ownership rate are known as NIMBYs, or not in my backyard residents. By limiting a fresh supply, they aim to protect the value of their assets. They support elected officials that impose constrained planning that results in unresponsive supply. Therefore, when demand exceeds supply, due to an expanding economy, prices are greatly increased. As a result, nations with relatively high rates of home ownership, such as the UK or the US, tend to have laws that encourage home ownership as well as planning structures that result in a supply that is rigid. There is always the concern that while we would like to provide housing for young people, we won't allow it to degrade our neighborhoods. This elitism and mindset, in my opinion, are completely out of control. That needs to change since members of the millennial generation can't afford the necessities of life, like a home. The inability to construct, especially in urban areas, has also slowed productivity and hurt economies. It is challenging for people to relocate to those locations when housing is expensive. And since it's challenging for people to relocate to those cities, it follows that they have difficulty finding the jobs they want. And that essentially slows down the expansion of the economy as a whole. Homeowners are less likely to start their own businesses and less inclined to relocate in search of employment. According to research, a rise in home ownership in America has traditionally been accompanied by a substantial rise in unemployment because people are unwilling to move in order to obtain a new job. The financial crisis put an end to the rising home ownership rate. For folks like Tim, obtaining a mortgage has become much more difficult as a result of slow earnings growth and stricter mortgage lending guidelines. The decline in property ownership is a concern for politicians. We are assisting all Americans in discovering their route to the American dream. However, having more tenants may not always be a negative thing. There is a widespread belief that owning a home is preferable to renting. It builds a stronger, more stable society. Realistically, there isn't much proof that property ownership makes people better citizens. Many proponents of house ownership use Singapore as an example of highly stable nation with a high ownership rate. On the UN's Human Development Index, the country ranks 9th in the world, with 91% of the population owning their own home. However, if we look at Romania, the rate of home ownership is even higher. But in terms of development, Romania ranks far worse than the rest of the globe. Hence, we return to Switzerland. Despite being one of the most industrialized nations in the world, very few people live in their own homes here. Switzerland has a mechanism that helps renters like Diana. Prices are stable. Leases can last up to 20 years, and tenants' rights are upheld. Diana says, "In all those years, we never experienced a price hike. Since the reference interest rates were likewise lowered, you might ask our landlord to lower the price even more. And in accordance with law, we merely drafted a brief letter. We received the new, cheaper price 3 months later. Regarding its renting law, I believe Switzerland is unique. In another country, I wouldn't feel as safe. Renters in this country feel quite unsecure. We believe we are not getting a good deal. We don't think we're receiving excellent value for our money. My main motivation for wanting to purchase real estate is to avoid wasting money on rent each month." This is a typical argument against renting, but is it true? In 2018, renters in much of the developed world spent more on rent than homeowners did on mortgage payments. But in order to get the complete picture, we must include all of the expenditures over a longer time frame. Imagine someone in Britain having to decide between renting and buying. Assuming they choose to rent, every month they would give a landlord a single sum. But if they choose to purchase, their expenses would also include transactional costs, building insurance, and upkeep, in addition to the variable interest and mortgage payments. When all of those expenses are taken into account, renting can occasionally be a better option than buying a property. And the economy and interest rate both play a significant role in that. However, both the theory and the facts point to the fact that, in the long run, the costs of renting and purchasing a house are roughly equal. In the end, personal preference will determine which is better. However, it is untrue to say that one is fundamentally and indisputably superior to the other. Bricks and mortar investments aren't always a sure thing. Although many have benefited from rising home values during the 1970s, individuals who invested heavily in the American housing market at the height of the bubble suffered losses. Despite this, governments in the wealthy countries continue to fund initiatives to encourage home ownership. There is a concept known as mortgage interest deduction in America and many other nations. Homeowners can use this deduction to reduce their taxable income by the amount of mortgage interest. The mortgage interest deduction costs the US $100 billion a year in lost tax revenue. Additionally, the regulation has almost little impact on home ownership overall. Christian also studied Help to Buy, a British initiative that functions like a government-backed equity loan. The Help to Buy policy has a relatively low level of effectiveness. We discovered that the Greater London Authority's Help to Buy program did not result in any new housing construction and instead raised home prices above the indicated subsidy. The justification for the government investing all of this money in encouraging home ownership is rather flimsy. Additionally, they may use that money for things like healthcare, transportation, or education. Home ownership has been the West's largest economic policy error, not fostering a stable society. There are efforts underway to restore the balance. British rental agents are not allowed to charge tenants fees, and America has reduced the amount of tax relief it provides for mortgage interest deductions. But it's not enough. The moment has come to create a brand new housing market, one that truly works. We sincerely hope you enjoyed this presentation style. Thank you for watching this video. If you could give it a thumbs up and let your friends know about it, that would be great. Additionally, click the subscribe button. We hope to see you again next time.